Hi everybody, my name is Alex Beard and I'm excited to be here with you today. So I'm going to talk about how technology can transform education, but I'd like to begin by telling a story. And that story starts 14 years ago on my first day as a teacher in a school in South London. The school was on the Old Kent Road, which is London's cheapest monopoly property. And at the beginning of my time as a teacher, I really struggled. The kids didn't know much about Shakespeare, and I knew even less about how to be good in the classroom. And I'd been to this lovely primary school in the countryside and a lovely secondary school that looked a bit like Hogwarts in Harry Potter. And so I thought that teaching was simple. You just stood at the front of the classroom and talked about ideas and the kids learned things. But that wasn't the case. It wasn't like in the movies. The children I taught, about half of them were on free school meals, which is how we measure disadvantage here in the UK. 2/3 of them spoke English as a second language, and all of them came to school years behind where they should have been in their reading and writing, through no fault of their own, just the hand that they had been dealt in life. At the same time, I was aware that the students I taught were living in the future. They were using smartphones and spending all night playing online games. And yet the methods that I was using to teach them, I thought might have been familiar to Socrates back in ancient Greece 2,500 years ago. At the same time, however, I was reading a lot. I was aware of the big changes that we were making in neuroscience and psychology and understanding how our brains worked. I was reading about the latest advances in technology, of course, the explosion of the internet, of VR, and more than anything, AI. And I wondered, could we harness the power of those sciences and technologies to transform learning from where it was today? And I knew that we had to. I'd also been reading about how robots were coming to take all of the jobs of young people, and that the skills that they were learning today weren't going to prepare them for the roles that they would have in the 21st century. And so I had these two big questions that I was asking. First of all, what is it that children should be learning today? And then secondly, what will our education systems look like in the future? And what role will technology play within that? So since then, I've been very fortunate to spend my career traveling the world in search of the best practices that will inform the future of education. I now run a learning lab at an organization called Teach for All, and we work across the world in 60 different countries. We're a network of independent social enterprises that are all focused on reforming and improving education outcomes, particularly for the most marginalized communities. That includes work that we do in with an organization in Japan. Teach for Japan is currently placing teachers in classrooms in Japanese schools and has plans to recruit another 60 teachers next year. They're also doing some work in Kaga City, thinking about how to build a learning ecosystem for the future. And so through this work, I get to travel the world to these many different countries and try and study the best practices, talk to leading teachers, speak to scientists and technologists, and try to understand what the future of education might look like. And my studies have left me certain of one thing above all, and that's that the future of education doesn't depend on some big piece of new technology. The future of education depends on human development. And actually, I think that you can see this really playing out in the current crisis. And we've been studying school systems and schools and education throughout the crisis here at Teach for All. And in fact, I think that if you look carefully at the topic, you can see these three dangerous ideas coming from technology that might stop us realizing that potential. So I'm going to talk about those today. The first dangerous idea is the idea that machines solve problems. Now, of course, we know where this idea comes from. It comes from the fact that computers can now beat us at games of chess and at Go. And we can see it in education in the development of adaptive learning platforms being used in schools from Silicon Valley to Shanghai today with companies like Century Tech in the UK, Squirrel AI in China. However, when we actually look at what's been going on during this crisis across our network, we've seen that it's not machines that are solving problems, actually it's people. So to give you one example, here in the UK, last April, when the pandemic hit and schools locked down, people suddenly said, okay, technology is going to be the solution. And in fact, a group of teachers came together in 2 weeks, created a new online school for the UK. They now teach 1 million students every single day. This school didn't exist 9 months ago. And they are using technology in the classroom, but it's not machines there that have solved the problem. It's a simple tool that the people who've taken on this problem are using. It's a solution created by humans, by human teachers, for humans, for children, using technology as a support. So they have an online school, a platform with videos, but they're not using AI or adaptive learning. They're simply getting teachers to post their best videos and then teachers to assess the work that kids are doing. The second dangerous idea that we have from the world of technology is this idea that learning should be user-friendly. Now, we can see, again, why this idea is really attractive. We can see it in our smartphones. What if we could make learning as addictive as TikTok? But actually, what we now know about the brain and about human learning is that it doesn't work if it's too user-friendly. Learning requires something that psychologists call desirable difficulty. If you want to learn something, you actually have to struggle a bit to lay down the architecture in your brain for you to actually have learned. We saw this happening across our network as well during the crisis. So in Chile, again, when the crisis came and schools were locked down, a group of teachers came together to create something called La Radio Enseña. 50 teachers worked with 200 radio stations and reached 3,000 rural schools across the country of Chile. And they developed these 30-minute lessons, which were designed for students to listen to on the radio. And they used all sorts of techniques. So for drama lessons, they would get kids acting out things at home. For history lessons, they would tell stories. For science lessons, they would get kids to experiment with things that they had in their houses with them. And what those teachers found as they were doing it was that the learners who they were creating the lessons for would learn best if you added in some difficulty to the learning process. If you added in quizzes, you added in difficult questions for the children to think about. And so what it teaches us is that actually learning is not at its best when it's user-friendly. Tech may be, but learning isn't. And so we should be thinking about designing things that have difficulty. The third dangerous idea that I think comes from technology that we should be wary of in learning is the idea that you should automate human learning, automate human intelligence if you possibly can. And again, we can see the attraction of this idea if you think about how you now navigate around a place using an app on your phone with a map. It makes life a lot easier to have automated that thing. However, what we now also know about the learning brain is that on average, in human beings, the size of the hippocampus in our brain is now diminishing because we're using our smartphones. So the hippocampus is the part of the brain that deals with navigation. But because we're outsourcing navigation to our tech, to AI and to smartphones, we're actually diminishing our human cognitive powers. So actually what we saw in the crisis that was not that tech was able to automate learning, but the best tech was enhancing learning. So an example of this was in India with the Kids Education Revolution. The Kids Education Revolution is a nationwide movement of young change makers in India connected to our network at Teach for All. Throughout the pandemic, student leaders themselves ran Instagram live workshops to build a community of young people that were supporting one another in their well-being, in their physical health, in their learning throughout the crisis. Ultimately, what we know about how humans learn is that we're essentially natural-born learners. We're a species of teachers and students. Our brains are specially adapted over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to learn from our environment, to learn from our tools, but especially to learn from one another. So we're not best when we're automating human learning. We're at our best when we're enhancing what we already do well. So I think actually we'd be better off if we had 3 different ideas that are helping us to think about the role of technology in education today. The first idea is that machines don't solve problems, humans solve problems together. We've seen this in the pandemic. In the case of Oak National, that's a group of people coming together using some technology to solve a problem. It's not the machine that's doing the solving. The second big idea that we should hold on to is that we should be making learning user unfriendly, making it a little bit difficult, engaging learners in the world around them, asking them to struggle with difficult ideas, giving them hard things to do. That's how learning takes place, even within the context of the recent crisis. And the final idea, I think, is that we should seek to enhance learning, enhance our human powers as learners, as again we saw in all of these examples, using bits of tech like Instagram, a simple online learning platform, a video platform like YouTube, as a tool that learners working together, teachers and students, or students working with their peers, can use to enhance their learning and to build their knowledge. So I think these 3 ideas are ones that we see playing out consistently in technology and education, and we've seen being exacerbated in this particular crisis. So coming back to the original question, can technology transform education? I think that the answer is that education can be transformed and technology can play a role, but ultimately it will be people using technology that will transform education in the 21st century. And I think there are a few ways that we've seen in which that will happen, looking across our network. First of all, I think that we need to have an education that focuses on developing children's full human capabilities as learners. Technology can sometimes force us to narrow the curriculum to make it easier for AIs to understand and read and to automate aspects of the learning process. But the 21st century demands that we develop a broader set of student outcomes, student agency, student critical thinking, above all student leadership, so that students can be change makers in their community. Second big idea is that all of the innovations we've seen in the past year in response to the crisis have made smart use of ready-made technologies. Actually, we might have predicted a year ago that AI was going to have a big effect on what was going on in classrooms. And sure, it plays a big role in data analysis and back-end systems. But the frontline solutions that we've seen teachers and school leaders and parents and community members creating across our global network of 100,000 practitioners all use ready-made technologies, WhatsApp, smartphone apps, Google Classrooms, simple platform tech. I think the third big change that we're seeing and that we need to pay attention to is that we have to adapt and redefine the role of parents and teachers, especially in education. Now, again, technology might be able to serve the content or be the terrain on which kids can practice what they're doing, but it's teachers and parents supporting students that will actually make the learning happen. And I think we might see a change in that role. I think we're going to see teachers and parents who are going to be more deeply connected to one another around those platforms. I think we're going to see teachers who better understand how to use technology in their classroom to outsource bits of their learning, maybe assessment or practicing some core skills, allowing them to focus on other groups of kids that might need more support. I think teachers are going to become more deeply knowledgeable about psychology and neuroscience to really understand how kids in their classroom learn and how they might work together. And we're going to see teachers who are out in communities as leaders affecting change. That's what we've seen in this crisis. And that brings me to my fourth point, that if technology is going to play a role in transforming education, that will require us above all to invest in the collective leadership of people. Each of the examples I shared, in fact, I would say any successful solution that we've seen across our global network to the challenges created by the learning crisis this year have all involved a group of people coming together, teachers with students, with parents, with school leaders, with policymakers, with politicians and businesses. And it's when those groups come together around a shared challenge or a shared problem, ask how they might solve it, and then ask what tools, what technology might help them solve it, that we really see solutions being made. And we call that collective leadership. And so tech isn't a silver bullet for transforming education. The most important job in the future is not going to be AI designer. The most important job is going to be teacher. The most important institutions will not be the research labs. They'll be the schools that are helping us to get the most out of our own human intelligence. And the future of learning and the role that tech will play in it is not going to depend on the quality of the AI that we can create. It's going to depend above all on the leadership that we can build in people. Thank you.